All right, I'm before I bring Coach Johnson on, I want to give you guys an education on what Jimmy did and what my coach did at Dallas. Mark Tuney was in Dallas before Jimmy got there for like 3 years. Kevin Gogan, Nate, Crawford Kerr. Jimmy brought in Mark Stepnoski to replace Tom Rafferty. Tom Landry had those guys. He won 3 ball games with them. How did Jimmy make that line elite? He drafted a 5'9" running back who everybody, I'll never forget, I'm standing there when he got him and I'm going, man, I'll tell you what, but Jimmy knew. Escambia, 12,000 rushing yards. Florida, 4,000. He knew he'd make that team elite. And as soon as Emmett got in there, Jimmy always said this about Emmett. Hey, you know the difference between him and Barry? Barry's going to go -2, -2, -1, 8 yards, 75. You know what Emmett's going to do? 8 yards, 9 yards, 6 yards. You look up, he's got 28 carries for 157, and they win. They beat you up and young. Jimmy had a way of turning average players into elite players. We bring the author of Swagger on right there. See that book? Coach, am I right when I say that? I mean, you had I'll never forget Thousand Oaks. You walk in here and you go, Jesus, I got more talent at Miami than I got here. And you're sitting around and you're going, you must have brought 1 million guys in on Tuesdays to look at because you were just looking for players to come in and you were trying to find the right combinations. You end up drafting Emmett, and I'm going to go to Bijan Robinson here in a second. Do you agree, Coach, that one of the linchpin moves that you made was drafting and having the faith in Emmett, and that's what turned that offense into elite?
Well, without question, Emmett had a large part to do with it. The other thing is, you mentioned those offensive linemen, Tuanay, undrafted free agent, Nate Newton, undrafted free agent, Kevin Gogan, 7th-round pick. You look at Mark Stepnoski, a 3rd-round pick, offensive guard that we made into a center. And then you had a 3rd-round pick, Eric Williams from Central Ohio. You look at those players, and they say, well, that might be the greatest offensive line ever in the NFL. Well, there's a combination of a couple of things. First of all, they were hard workers. They were good players. They had a great offensive line coach in Tony Wise. And then, of course, you had Emmitt Smith. Now you support them with a great quarterback, with Troy Aikman, a great receiver with Michael Irvin, Alvin Harper, Novacek. So we had an outstanding unit. But I said, before, and I know Howie Long and Michael Strahan disagreed with me, but I think on the entire coaching staff, the one coach that's more valuable than the players that he coaches is the offensive line coach. If any other position, I'll take a defensive lineman over a defensive line coach. I'll take a running back over a running back coach. But I'll take the offensive line coach over those offensive linemen. You look at some of the great offensive linemen or the lines in history when Alex Gibbs was with the Broncos. You look at the Patriots, Sarkisian. You look at, Tony Wise with the Cowboys.
Joe Bugle, Washington.
Yeah. And so the offensive line coach is really one of the more important coaches on your staff.
The Eagles seemingly have a guy like that, Coach, and Jeff Stoutland. And,
right.
Coach, I mean, this guy here, the Eagles, man, I mean, Kelsey's a 6th-round guy. Mulata was taken in the 7th.
Right.
Lane was a 1. Dickerson was a 2. These guys, Coach, are so well coached. Yes. I mean, unbelievable. So he's worth the weight in gold then, Jeff Stoutland, because I consider him the best O-line coach in the NFL.
Yeah, I think you've got a couple. The one that was at Washington, now at Cleveland. He was at Dallas at one time. He is an outstanding line coach. But now you mentioned Robinson. he is a talent at running back. Now, the shelf life for running backs is pretty short, but I think he could make an impact on a football team in a hurry.
Well, I'm going to start there then, Coach. I mean, Coach, this is a big conversation. Our show's based in Philly, Coach, and there's a lot of talk about this. So you've got a bunch of dudes in the backfield. You've got an elite O-line. You've got 2,000-yard receivers. Dallas Goedert is turning into a really good tight end, and now you've got Jalen Hurts. Coach, you put a back there like Bijan Robinson. He's all pro, and he's a 1,500-yard back. You had a lesser talented Miles Sanders last year who had 1,300 yards, 11. Doesn't that make more sense than, say, signing an edge rusher at 10? And how would you handle that with your talent evaluation looking at that could be the last piece to push us over Kansas City?
Yeah, I think if Robinson falls to Philadelphia, without question, they've got to consider him. A lot of people are talking about Gibbs at Alabama. I think Robinson's a little bit more of a physical back than Gibbs. But without question, he would make that offense exciting. You look at what they did a year ago, adding the receivers and with Jalen Hurts coming on strong, you add a great running back to that offense, and they're going to score some points.
Coach, Jalen Hurts, do you think he's an elite quarterback?
Yeah, I think in that style of offense, he is. I watched him in preseason and workouts against the Miami Dolphins. I was so impressed with his work ethic, his leadership ability. I mean, there's no BS about him. He wants to get the job done, whatever it takes to get the job done. And I think he fits right in as far as that style of offense. Now, if you put him in a different style of offense, I don't know how great he is. But in that offense, he knows how to run it.
He sure does, Coach. To me, he's like a Jamal Holloway that could throw. You know what I mean? He's kind of like that. But to me, in that kind of style, Coach, there's not really a gigantic shelf life. That's why, to me, the running back makes more sense. I'm not looking to take his production away when it comes to yards, but I want his yards per carry to go up. I don't want him carrying it 17 times. That's why I say if you put an elite guy behind him, you limit the hits in open space, and you give him the opportunity to be – because RPO means run pass. It's not pass run option. You start with the run game. That's why, to me, that makes more sense.
Well, I think if you got Robinson there along with Hurts, it opens up one-on-one coverage on those receivers. And even Dallas Goedert, he was a big part of the offense when he was healthy this year. So you end up you can pound them, and then get the big plays with the receivers that they have.
Coach, I was telling a story of this guy here. I was telling the story right when he was drafted. Guy told me, because we're talking about Jalen Carter now, and I was like this. They go, Dan, I go, would you draft Jalen Carter? And I go, well, I'd like to have a conversation with him. And I go, let me tell you how my coach would handle it. He would give you a set of rules, and Jimmy would put him on his talent scale like this. Here's where you are, son. If you're here and you're productive, I'll put up with some of your bullshit. But if you start tilting the scale, you told all of us that. Coach, would you, if he fell to 10, I think he's either the first or second best player in the draft next to Will Anderson and Bijan. And if he falls to 10, how would you handle a guy that's got some issues from a man who's handled a lot of guys with a lot of issues?
If I could deal with you, Dan, I could deal with anybody.
That's right.
I think the biggest thing, and we had some players that were on the edge, when we were there in Dallas. I think the biggest thing for a head coach, you've got to have one-on-one conversations with the individual. Charles Haley and I, who right now, we're as close as any player that I've ever coached. But there were some trying times when Charles first came to the Cowboys. And he came into my office one time after I'd ripped him in a practice. And he said, Coach, if you'll just, talk to me one-on-one, and, try to correct the mistakes one-on-one, rather than embarrassing me in front of the other players, then we'll be fine. And after that, we were always hunky-dory. So there was no problem after that. But I think the head coach, sometimes you look at yourself as the CEO, and and you try to, have a blanket for everybody. And I don't think it works that way. And I think there's so much individualism nowadays with the players that you've got to spend time with them one-on-one and counsel them and make sure that you're both on the same page.
Coach, you think players today have to be more stroked than our days? Do you think they have to be more stroked today because of social media and stuff?
I don't know if stroke's the right word. I think, they've got to be disciplined. You've got to have, credibility there, and they have to know what to expect from you, just like you expect something from them. But I do believe that you have to spend more time one-on-one. I don't think the old days of they'll run through a brick wall for you. I don't think that flies anymore. I think you tell them to do it, and they're going to say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense running through a brick wall. But you've got to talk to them, and make sure that they believe in what you're doing. But again, it's back to one-on-one conversations with them.
Coach, the draft, a couple questions on the draft. I want to put you at 10, and I want to put you back into the draft room. How do you prepare when you don't have the number 1 overall pick and you're, say, sitting at 10 or you're sitting at 30? How many boards do you have? How many options? Is it a sandbox of players that you have that you're looking at, filling needs, and then do you go by best player? Do you go by more talented player? Or what's more important to you, the need or the talent of the player?
I always talk, I didn't want to go with the philosophy of take the best player available. I went with take the best player available where I want to pick him. I would always, if I was going to be at 10, I was always going to identify 3 or 4 players that were going to be somewhere around 10 that I wanted, that fit our football team. And if it looked like those 3 or 4 players were not going to be there at 10, then I would move out of that spot and move down, get some extra picks. Or if I had 3 or 4 players and 3 of those 4 are already picked, I might move up a spot to make sure I got a guy that I wanted. I think you've got to identify players that fit into your system, players that can help your football team, players that you really want to coach. And then you have those players identified where they're going to go. I identified Zach Thomas in the 5th round. I wanted to pick him. Now, if it looked like I wasn't going to get him in the 5th round, I'd have moved up to the 4th round to pick him. But I felt pretty comfortable with a 5'11" linebacker that I was going to get him at 5. And so you've got to identify certain players that you really want to come out with. I would have obviously studied the entire board. I would go through 300 or 400 players, but I would go into the draft with about 20 players, 3 or 4 in each round. And then I wanted to come out of the draft with about, 6 or 7 players that I had identified that I wanted. And I would move up or move down to get those players.
I was talking to Coach Wanstadt last week, and how he said you guys always approached it. You would look at the talent of the draft. Coach, I hear guys talking, well, this guy Skornowski from Northwestern is a top 10 pick, and Paris Johnson is a top 10 pick, or this guy. And I go, yeah, but are they top 10 picks? Is this draft that talented? And when I look at the draft, Coach, there's probably 5 guys, 6 wild players. The kid Anderson looks like a wild guy. The Tyree Wilson kid from Tech looks maybe like a wild guy. Bijan, maybe Bryce Young, he's kind of small for me. But again, there's not a lot of guys that I went, to me, you're trying to tell me you think that Paris Johnson guy looks like Orlando Pace, who was almost drafted in the same play? Do you look at that, Coach, and go, hey, you may say he's the 8th pick, but this is the prime example of places overdrafting. That guy's not the 8th pick, Coach, and on any other draft, he'd be like 18. How do you get around that?
Dan, I was never really concerned about how strong a draft was. I looked at it like, again, I would study those 300 or 400 players, and I'd come up with 15 or 20 that I wanted throughout the draft.
And that's where you would put the value chart on these guys.
Some of them, maybe I wanted Larry Brown in the 12th round back when they had 12 rounds. But I would identify certain players that I wanted to get. I wanted to get Leon Lett in the 7th round, and so yeah, I didn't worry about how strong a draft was. I just wanted to make sure that I came out of the draft with 7 or 8 players that I wanted to coach, that fit our football team, that fit our needs, that were talented enough to play in the NFL.
Coach, what's a profile for you? I tell people I kind of like use like an FBI profile on how you looked at players. First, he had to be smart. He had to be a gym rat. Some of the other things, this guy had to be, hey, look, you got to be on time. You got to play like hell when we tell you to do all that. I mean, is that kind of the foundation of what you looked at in the guy?
Dan, we have coaches come down here to the Keys on a regular basis. And I tell them, I said, listen, everybody can look at these players in college and say, he is a great player. And I said, but now who can identify if they're going to get better? And what are the intangibles that say that they're going to get better? Hey, if we've identified him as a good player, okay, now, is he smart? Is he a gym rat that'll work his rear end off? Does he have character? Is he a playmaker? Does he have quickness? Now, those things, those intangibles tell me he will improve. If he's not a very smart player, he's not going to get a whole lot better. If he's not a gym rat, if he doesn't work hard, he's not going to get a lot better. And so those guys fall by the wayside after about 2 or 3 years. But those guys that are smart, that work hard, are playmakers, they got quickness and they got character, they get better and better and better. They'll be with your football team for 7, 8, 9 years and be productive. That's what I'm looking for. Try to identify, like I said, Dan, you can look at the, college players and you can say, he's a good player, or he's not a good player. But I try to identify good players that will get better, because if they get better, then they'll be productive in the National Football League.
2 last questions for you. Coach, when decisions were being made on players, did you take your coaching staff's opinions of what they saw, or was it just you and Bob Ackles? And then finally your decision.
Well, first of all, Bob was a secretary. He didn't do anything. He didn't look at players at all. So, but he was my administrator. The coaches had great input preparing for the draft. The scouts had great input preparing for the draft. But on draft day, I was making the call.
Coach, for you though, boy, it just seems to me that your scouting team that you put together was just as important as your position coaches when it came to putting them, because those guys would give your position coaches like Butch and Dave and Tony and Coach Campo, they would give them the intel, and then you guys all sit down and chop it up, right?
Yeah, I knew my scouts and I knew my coaches. That's the great thing about have continuity. For instance, Jason Garrett's father, Jim Garrett, was a scout for me. Well, I'd listen to Jim, and Jim would say how great he was, but I knew Jim was going to be overselling him. Everybody's going to be an all-pro. I would look at Jeff Smith, who is an outstanding scout, but if they had any character problem at all, if he had a speeding ticket, Jeff was going to downgrade him. So I knew my people. I knew, for instance, with Butch was going to oversell all of them. All of them were going to be all pro, but Tony Wise, Tony, nobody could play, and so you got to know your scouts, you got to know your coaches, but they were with me for a long time. So I would listen to them, but I would take everything with a grain of salt as far as evaluating the decision that I was going to make on draft day.
Coach, I'm going to leave you with this. So I get a call this morning from Michael Irvin, and we're chopping it up, and I tell him how much I love him. I tell him how much I will always back him, how much this and that. And we start going back and talking about our locker room. I said, you know what, that guy, Coach Johnson, I got him on today. I go, do you know, outside of my family, Mike, the reason that we talk about that great environment in our locker room, it's like the same reason we watch our favorite movies or listen to our favorite songs. Man, I get text messages from Alfredo Roberts in Houston. He's now the tight end coach in Pittsburgh now, sending me, look, I'm about the basketball. I mean, Coach, I don't think you understand that environment and what we all did together that, people keep asking me, do you think Miami will ever? I go, no, Miami will never get back to what JJ did with that environment because, Coach, that was just catch. I don't think anybody's ever going to do. They may get back to winning, Coach, but they're not going to get back to how we were.
Well, we were an independent. We were playing a national schedule. Every other week we're on national television, and we were beating those people. That's what made it so much fun. When 1 week you're beating Michigan, and the next week you're beating Oklahoma, then the next week you're beating Notre Dame. That makes it fun. And so I used to tell people the most fun time I ever had in my life, was coaching at the University of Miami when we had all those great players. But the most fun time of my life is right now. And so but I had a ball there in Miami.
Wait a minute, Coach. So you think reeling Sileo and Brown off the edge is it's more fun now to take one of them tunas out of the Atlantic now than bringing those guys off the edge, right?
I don't have near as many headaches. I don't have to put out near as many fires now.
Coach, thank you so much for your time. I always appreciate it. And by the way, please, guys, it's a must-read. Swagger. I got it up there on the shelf there with all the Miami stuff. And every single football Coach Johnson gave me personally, just so you know, including the book. So thank you, Coach.
All right, Dan. Have a good one.
You got it. Hall of Famer, NFL Hall of Famer, Jimmy Johnson there. Interesting stuff on what he said, though, and how he looks at a draft. Okay, and how he goes through the draft and preparing. By the way, Tone, I don't know, but tell me something here. Was Jimmy a fan of Bijan Robinson to Philadelphia? He would make that offense exciting. Did I hear that? Tone, that's got to be a soundbite. Bijan Robinson, Tone, quote, Bijan Robinson would make the Eagle offense exciting. Sure sounds it to me. But hey, I'd rather take a running back in the 8th round. Oh, wait, they don't have 8 rounds. In the 7th round. Come on, man. Come on. Or hey, I know, and hey, Tone's right, man. This guy's going to kick my ass. Hey, I'll take the edge rusher, Myles Murphy, at 10. Yeah. Myles Murphy at 10. And not the best player in the freaking draft. Let me take Myles Murphy. Hey, top of the hour, I'm going to rank the best defensive players that are in the draft, though. Holy cow, man. JJ just said, if the kid's there at 10, you got to think about it. Come on, man. But that's not what the Eagles do. Oh, you're right. You're going to pass. Hey, I think we were kind of saying the same thing. He goes, Sills, I don't look at it that way. I look at, if I wanted a guy, Jimmy looked at value of the player at the time. His number one objective was always this. He was never going to overdraft. He was never. Okay? He was never going to do that. And some of you guys want to take Dick Van Dyke from Iowa. Come on, me. Come on, me. I'll take Lucas Dick Van Dyke at number 10. That ain't happening, dog. Not in my world. Okay? Oh, I forgot to ask him I should have asked him about how he has GM. I should have. We're good to go. How you doing? Jimmy Johnson said, Bijan, go Philly. You should draft him. The man who drafted Emmitt Smith. The man who built a dynasty and killed teams. And by the way, had some of the greatest rivalries. Dude, that Eagle rivalry with the Cowboys, with Jimmy's, take his big fat ass across. And by the way, they were friends. Buddy and Jimmy were friends. I told you. I mean, how many times did I post that picture of Buddy coming down and talking to us? When Jimmy was at Miami, Buddy would come down and talk to us. I went out to lunch with Buddy Ryan and Jerome Brown and Jimmy Johnson, and think Stubbs was with us. Then he came in the meeting room, and get this. So Butch Davis is in our team meeting room. And I walk in, and Buddy Ryan's got the projector thing. Sit down. I think 86. Was that his first year? Was 86 the first year that Buddy Ryan was the head coach of the Eagles? Okay, I think it was 86, right? So he comes down there. Sit down. And everyone's like, who is this guy? So we sit down. I'm sitting there. He goes, Sileo, you sit here. Brown, you sit here. Butch starts laughing because Butch don't talk to us like that. And, hey, we're sitting there. Buddy Ryan's going like this. Sil's next JJ interview, you got to get somebody. Oh, yes. Promise you, Joe. But here's one right here. So Buddy's sitting in there. Jimmy had him come in. He goes like this. What are you two doing? Two-gapping. Well, and Butch is sitting back there. He goes, what are you looking at? Get the fuck up the field. Okay. He goes, Sileo, you're in a 3 technique. You have one responsibility. Get in the backfield, knock the guard off, get back there and make some plays. That's it. Jerome, how many plays are you going to take off? Dude, you thought he was our D-line coach. I'm sitting there going, I look at Stubbs. I'm like, why is he hollering at us? we won the national title last year. Why is he hollering at us? Dude, we lost one regular season game in 3 years, and this guy's hollering at us. And I'm going, what's he hollering at us for? Russell Maryland was wet behind the ears. All these guys are sitting behind us, and we're like, dude, he's hollering at us. And he's just screaming. Buddy Ryan's screaming. When, hey, Jerome, how many plays you going to take off? I start laughing. He goes, hey, I wouldn't laugh too hard, dear kid. You're 5 plays away from having your job taken from you. I looked over at him. He goes, you heard me. I'm going, who the frig is this? Dude, everyone, by the end of the meeting, everyone was laughing because he's just killing us. He's killing us. And he'd come down every year. He'd come down every year, and he would kill us. Is it a coincidence that the top 2 O-line prospects in the draft are from the Big Ten? Which conference has the best O-lines in your opinion? Southeastern Conference. Big Ten's Ohio State. Northwestern, the kid with the Chargers, Tone, from the Big Ten also is pretty good. I think the Big Ten's got some pretty good O-linemen in it. I do. I think the Big Ten's got good O-linemen. Okay, but I think the SEC's better. Yeah, man. Hey, Buddy Ryan would scream at you, man. You son of a bitch. I'm like, we're 30, we're like 35-1 in like 3 years. And he's screaming at us. Gotta make a play there. How could you let that fumble get away, Sileo? I did have 10 tackles in the game. He goes, oh, what? You're going to give me a resume now of a game? Really? You want me to break down all the shitty plays? Finally, I just start doing this. Man, I'm not winning with this thing here. I just shut the hell. Jerome's laughing. Everyone's laughing. Jimmy comes in and starts laughing. Butch never talked to us like that. Buddy Ryan, man, he getting your ass, though. What are you doing? He never pointed out the good ones and the good plays. He never pointed those out. He always pointed the shitty ones out. Look at this. It was a real lesson, though, having Buddy Ryan come down and coach you for a day, take you out to lunch. He was the head coach of the Eagles, and you saw what he was building. And plus, when he had Reggie, that's when everything changed. So we were privileged that he would come down, spend one day with us. He did that 2 years in a row, man. He came down in the spring of 87, and he came down in the spring of 86. And those 2 years, I would sit in the room. He goes, "Oh, you again?" I'd be like, "Dude." He goes. Then I found out he talked shit to Seth and he talked shit to Singletary. And you know what those two guys told me? Worry when Buddy ain't talking to you. And that's when you start going, "Okay, all right, I get it. I get it now. I get it." Oh man, we got a lot of. I haven't even hit the topics yet. Holy cow! So again, here are the areas going into the draft that your Eagle team needs to address to continue its progression on being one of the elite teams in the NFC. You got a starting position open. You have a starting position open. It's not that easy just saying, "Hey, I'm going to put X in there and we're ready to go." Did you hear what also? Hey, Tone, I think it's very important. I think this is a soundbite too, Tone. He said Jeff Stoutland is the most important coach on your coaching staff and that he would take a great O-line coach over someone like Lane Johnson or Kelsey because they're worth their weight in gold. Hear what he said on the other end? He goes, "I would take a D-lineman over a D-line coach any day. But I wouldn't take a great O-line coach. I would not take a great O-line coach over a great O-lineman because those guys are worth their weight in gold." I thought that was profound. I had not heard him ever say that. The most important coach on any coaching staff, according to Coach Johnson, is the O-line coach. It's not a coordinator. Did you hear what he said? He never mentioned coordinators. He said the most important coach in his coaching staff is his offensive line coach. And Tony Weiss was with him from Oklahoma State to Miami to the Cowboys to the Dolphins. Tony Weiss was with him his entire NFL career. That's crazy. I had never heard him say that. Okay? I'd never heard him say, "My O-line coach is my most important guy." White people against Bijan. This kid is the real deal with the Eagles pipeline. Are you kidding me? He's great at getting to the second level, runs in traffic exceptionally well, in my opinion, too. I'm with you. Fly, Eagle, fly. I'm with you. I think he's the best player in the draft. I think him and Will Anderson, you could flip a coin. I think they're the two best. I mean, this is what even general managers are saying. And even Coach Johnson said, if he's at 10, you got to look at him. You can't just let him walk. You can't just walk away from the best player in the draft. You can't. You just can't. What if Kansas City moves up and gets him? Good grief. Get him on a rookie deal too. Hey, guys, please hit the like button. Jimmy Johnson said the Eagles would be great. Well, he didn't say that, but he did say you got to look at it. You've got to look at it. I agree with that take. Jack Driscoll was a fourth rounder. Stoutland turned him into a Swiss Army knife and built Mulata up into what he is. I mean, this guy here, I mean, there's no question. Look at it. Hey, you have to agree that Kelsey's game has been elevated since Stoutland's in the building. I mean, shit. Jason Kelsey doesn't want to retire because he's got such great coaching around him. I think that's amazing, some of those takes that Jimmy had. I had the top 13 defense. I couldn't figure and find 20 players in this draft, top defensive players. I couldn't find 20. I only found 13. I got 13 players, in my opinion, that I think are the best defensive players. Also, 5 teams that I think will make trades. We're going to look at that. And what's the topics? I said, okay, I want to get back to that elite conversation again. It's not a rip at Jalen. This is not an attack on the kid. Okay? And again, a little bit more on Bijan Robinson. Hour number 2. Please hit the like button. Keep it here on the National